I'd like to call this council and committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
Your Worship, all members of council are present this evening, with the exception of Councillor Pissarro, who should be here momentarily.
Okay, thank you. Just a few brief announcements. I wanted to congratulate the Nichols family for 61 years of service to this community. They've closed Nichols Marine on September the 30th after 61 years of service. Business started by Blake Nichols, carried on by his son and daughter-in-law, Tim and Judy Nichols. And unbelievably, they had one employee, Walt St. Louis, who worked there for 46 years, another mechanic, Corey Cote, who worked there for 28 years. So we wish them the best of luck in their retirement. I'm sure they will enjoy a well-deserved one. And there's already a new business in there. Perfect. Yeah, that's excellent. So it's a marine engine repair. Councillor Nutt's just advised me. That's excellent. For those of you who aren't aware, there's a municipal election that's coming up, and there's some advance polls that open a week and a half from now. So the first advance poll will be on Friday, October the 12th, 2018. That will be at the Stevensville Memorial Hall, and that will be between the hours of 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. The following day, Saturday, October the 18th, the advance poll will be at the Leisureplex Banquet Hall, and that will be, 13th. That will be between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday, October the 15th, the advance poll will be at the Central Fire Station between the hours of 1 and 8 p.m. And the final advance poll will be Tuesday, October the 16th at Crystal Ridge Community Center between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. And on Saturday, October the 13th, the clerk's office at Town Hall will be open for those who wish to certify proxy votes. Just another election-related matter. There is a mayor's debate tomorrow, October the 2nd, 5:30 to 6:30. A meet and greet. 7 till 8:30 is the actual debate. And finally, the Crystal Beach 5K, of which we heard last week, is scheduled for next Saturday, October the 6th. The fun run, the kids' 1K fun run, takes place at 10:15 a.m. And this is then to disclosures of pecuniary interest. There being none, we have one notice of an upcoming public meeting, and that is with respect to the Crystal Beach Drive water main replacement and road reconstruction. That will take place tomorrow evening, 6 to 8 p.m. at the Crystal Ridge Library at the meeting room, and that's at 89 Ridge Road South. There are no public meetings this evening. We do have a consent agenda. Does anyone wish any of the items removed from the consent agenda? If not, could I have a mover for the consent agenda? Councillor Luberts. I was impressed by your tie. Your matching tie, shirt, and suit. Very impressive. Are there any questions with respect to the items on the consent agenda? Councillor Luberts.
Thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. Looking at IS 44/2018, the recommendation for the district school board. On page 2 of the report, they're looking for some concrete work to be done. And then on the one paragraph, it says the DSBN has allocated funds to pay for the construction of the units that they need. But when I look at the report on page 3 of the report itself, it says that the DSBN is willing to pay a maximum of $30,000. And it's kind of unclear, actually, as to how that's all going to happen if it's over $30,000. And I just want to make it clear that the taxpayers aren't going to be paying for their concrete work.
You're talking about the town of Fort Erie taxpayers as opposed to the DSBN taxpayers.
Yeah, the town.
Mr. Walsh?
Thank you, Mayor. The estimated construction is significantly under that. That was a number that was put in there for legal purposes.
Pardon me? It was put there for legal purposes? I don't understand.
Mr.
As long as
Mr.
it's
Lustig.
clear that we're not paying if there's a cost overrun.
Yeah, Mr.
If there's
Lustig,
a cost overrun, DSPN is still going to pay.
let's get Mr. Lustig to comment on that. I'm sure he's familiar with the contract.
Actually, Your Worship, I'm not. I can't honestly say that I understand why the $30,000 is there, so I can't be.
All right, so we'll go back to Mr. Walsh. What is there in the document that would protect the municipality from any cost beyond $30,000?
Other than we're not paying, I don't have that answer.
All right,
Excuse me, the DSBN has taken ownership of this project. This is their idea. The entire intent is that they would pay for everything. And as I noted, the estimated costs are significantly lower than $30,000.
all right, so what we will do, Councillor Luberts, and I see that there's an indication that if the costs exceed 30,000, there would have to be some further consultation and approval of GFAS. However, Mr. Lustig, will you make sure that you've addressed this so that when this comes back to us in a bylaw form, that, which it will, I presume, Madam Acting Clerk, this will come back to us in a bylaw form, that we've addressed that issue?
Yes, I will, Your Worship.
Thank you. Is that satisfactory, Councillor Luberts?
Yes, yes, and if I may, Mayor Redekop.
Yep, please proceed.
On page 4 of the agreement, D, the town agrees that it will be responsible at its own expense, at its own cost and expense for ongoing maintenance and upkeep of the equipment. And again, I don't know why it is that the town should be paying the upkeep. If the concrete cracks or crumbles and it needs repair, then the DSPN should be paying. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mind if the DSPN is there and they're using the land, right? But we don't normally have a shot put pad in our parks or other pad, discus pad in our park. So if we're going to put one in there and it needs maintenance, then if we do the maintenance, then we would charge DSPN. They pay the maintenance.
Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The assets, once they're constructed, become the property of the town. So in essence, DSBN is donating these to the town for our future use.
Councillor Luberts.
Well, then maybe through you, Mayor Redekop, to Mr. Walsh. What's our future use of a discus pad? I've never heard of a town event where we throw a discus
Well,
or a javelin.
the reality
Those
is,
are all track and field events from a school. We don't do those things here at the town.
we don't, but this is another partnership between the municipality and the school board, and that happens to be a park that could be utilized for those types of events. They hasn't been required because the only track in Fort Erie until now has been at the Ridgeway High School, which had a grass infield and a grass field around the track, whereas over here we've got an all-weather infield, which means you can't be throwing spears and tossing discuses or shot puts. So this is an opportunity for a partnership. I understand your concern about the ongoing costs, but presumably if it was to be replaced, there'd have to be some further negotiations. But Mr. Walsh, why couldn't we have a provision that indicates that the school board is responsible for ultimate repair and replacement rather than the municipality?
We can negotiate that. I'm not sure they'll go for it, but it is a point of negotiation. Just further to Councillor Lubert's question, this park is not solely for DSBN. The intent is to open it up to other track clubs within Niagara and also host summer events on it. that for instance, the Niagara Olympic track and field club participates in. So it's not just solely for school board activities.
Councillor Luberts?
Well, that's not what I'm reading in the report and in the agreement. In the report and in the agreement, this is between the town of Fort Erie and the DSPN. We're not.
The construction,
We're not being asked to put things in our park or other athletic clubs. That's not even in this report. Nothing to do with these clubs. This is something between the DSPN and the town of Fort Erie. And if you read, the DSPN is also saying that they have ultimate coverage of these parks from the morning till the afternoon at all times. That's not, and I get this, but, you know, I'm out there campaigning just as well as all the other candidates or councilors here. And one thing that I'm hearing is our taxes, and people are complaining that, you know, they're paying too much taxes, and here we are giving to the DSPN, and we know that the DSPN has money. And I'm not comfortable with saying, oh yeah, the taxpayers will cover the cost for the DSPN. That's what I'm dealing with here. I'm not dealing with a athletic club.
okay, anything further on this, Councillor Luberts?
No.
Anyone else? On
Could we
any-
maybe deal with this separately, because
All right.
if it stays this way, I can't support it.
Okay, so we'll remove Report IS 44, 2018 from the consent agenda. Let's deal with it right now. Are there any further comments or questions with respect to this specific report? Councillor Butler and then Councillor McDermott.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Walsh. If outside clubs are allowed to participate and take some privilege to those facilities, would there be a cost associated to them utilizing that?
For you, Mr. Mayor, we haven't worked out a rental cost, but I would assume we would develop one. Right now, this report just covers the construction. DSBN gets free use, and they do have priority coverage on it. We don't foresee a conflict at any time. There's simply not that many events going around, but there is an opportunity to generate a small amount of revenue on this.
Okay, and further to that, then what type of costs are associated for the maintenance and upkeep of that park?
These, through you, Mr. Mayor, these assets are very minimal in nature. We have fence backstops, asphalt tracks, and some concrete pads. So, you know, over their lifespan, it's a few dollars a year in terms of life cycle costs.
And one last
Yes, you
question,
may.
if you don't mind. So if by chance the town of Fort Erie would have to do some, I guess for the lack of better words, some reconstruction or repair work, would it be astronomical? And my second part is that if we're charging outside groups to utilize that field, could we not put it into a kitty to save up for the eventuality of that?
Mr. Walsh?
Your first question was regarding the magnitude of cost. Through this report, you can see the costs are significantly under $30,000. It would remain the same in current dollars when it's replaced in the future. With respect to putting any rental revenue into a special fund, for the small amount we're generating on this, I'm not sure it would be worth creating a special account for it.
Anything further? Councillor McDermott? Councillor Zanko?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm actually very happy to see this partnership. I think that we're getting some great value for enhancements to Ferndale Park. I don't disagree with Councillor Luberts regarding the maintenance, and if you could possibly have that conversation with the DSBN. I am going to support this report regardless, but it is a good point, and if we could take advantage of them including maintenance, I think that it would be definitely a good move.
Any other questions or comments? Before I go back to you, I have a question, Councillor Luberts, and it relates to paragraph 2E of the agreement, which is found on page 6 of our package. And it talks about use of this equipment is subject to the discretion of the town, but it's got to be outside of the school hours of use, which are 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. on a daily basis. If the high school isn't using it, presumably, Mr. Walsh, some other use could be made of these facilities, such as an elementary school track and field meet, which would take place undoubtedly on a school day between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m.
That's correct.
So this is simply a matter of making sure that the high school doesn't have a need for the use of that facility, and presumably that would be something that would be run through the municipality to ensure that there isn't an overbooking of the park.
That's correct again.
And in order to use the park, any park owned by the municipality, that has to be approved by the municipality?
That's correct.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Back to you, Councillor Luberts.
So thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. And going to the same paragraph, 2A, the priority that the high school will have priority of lands between 7 and 5 on all regular school days. And if the municipality were to give permission from another group, and then all of a sudden the high school wants to do something, and there's a conflict with the days, does that mean that we have to cancel the other group, and that the high school can just come in at any time?
Well, Mr. Lustig, do you want to weigh in on this? Because my view would be that in order for the municipality to allocate time during those hours, they would first have to get clearance from the school board. Once the school board gives the clearance, I think it's difficult for them to change their mind once we've booked it.
I agree with that.
Can you explain? We would have to get permission
What would happen
from
is
the
if,
school board?
so as an example, the elementary schools decide to have their Fort Erie track and field meet for public schools at the track over here and over at Ferndale Park for some of their events. They ask the town for the use of Ferndale Park. The town would have to contact the high school and say, okay, we've received a request for the use of the field on such and such a date. Are you planning on using this field? Presumably, because the track would be utilized by the public schools as well, it would be a date that would be compatible. Once we've booked that park for the public schools, we would have had to receive something from the high school to confirm they don't need it. I think at that point, then they've waived that particular priority on that particular date, so that I don't see a problem.
Well, as long as that's clear, that once it's cleared up, that they, because that's, the way it reads, that's not explained in there.
That's
But
true.
the way it reads, it says we have priority, and if we decide that we want to use it and you book it with an athletic club, well, I don't know who the athletic club would be, but then they have the priority, and we would have to reschedule the athletic club. But as long as that's clear that once we've booked it, then the way it's booked is booked. I'm sure that there'll be some communication with the DSBN.
Mr. Lustig, when you're going to be reviewing this draft agreement before it's signed.
Yes, I am.
Presumably you will look at that as well, because it should be clear how that would work to ensure that there isn't a problem with respect to bookings.
Yes, so I've heard of several suggested changes to the agreement, and we'll put them forward to the school board.
Okay, thank you. Anything
So,
further?
but yeah, just to further that, if Mr. Ludzik is going to be looking into this and making these changes, would that require that we defer this until those changes are made and then have it come back?
I think what we can do is we can approve this and on the understanding that there will be some modifications to the agreement if they're possible. If they're not possible, this agreement doesn't become effective until it's approved by bylaw. So that we would have, if we're not happy with the terms, then we don't approve it. But in terms of this report now, I don't see any reason why it can't go forward.
Well, Mayor Redekop, you just said we'll approve it as long as we can make the changes, if it's possible. Well, don't you
Right.
think we need to find out if it's possible first before we make the agreement? Because if we don't agree with what the SPN wants, maybe it won't get approved.
That's correct. That's correct. So,
Don't you think we should defer it until we clear those things up?
well, I don't, because we're not finalizing this until we get to a bylaw stage and we can make that determination at that point. However, you may not agree with me on that, and the majority of council may not agree with me on that. I'm quite happy to do whatever the majority wishes to do. Councillor Passero.
I support Mayor Redekop on this. I think this at least sends a signal that we're interested in pursuing this. The details can be hammered out at a later date, and if there's anything we don't like, we can always squash it at bylaw. But I think let's get moving on this tonight. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Anything further?
Yeah, I don't want anybody to get any ideas that I don't agree with working
Right.
with DSPN. But I just want to make sure that we're protected in this agreement, and a few things that I saw here obviously need to be changed.
Right.
So if we're going to go through with it, as long as we're going to go through with it with the changes coming forward, and then at bylaw stage, we can decide if the changes are there, then I can support it.
Right. So when this does come back, Mr. Lustig, you'll advise us of any changes that have been made or any efforts that have been made that haven't proven successful so that we can then make that determination?
Yes, I will, Your
Thank
Worship.
you. Anything further?
No.
I'm going to call the question then. All those in favor of the recommendation in Report IS 44? None opposed? That's carried. Back to the balance of the consent agenda. Any other questions? Councillor Nutt.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Walsh concerning IS 46, 2018, specifically the Ott Road rail crossing.
Yes.
Yeah, IS 43-2018. Yeah. Okay, specific to the Ott Road crossing. In the recommendations that we're proposing to send to the consultant to look at, for your reference, it's page 3, and it talks about the 4 recommendations in there: do nothing, realign Church Road, remove the crossing, and cut the cul-de-sacs. I have just some questions because in a neighboring municipality, there's been talk by one of the candidates there that they would like to see bridges and tunnels built over the railroad crossing. And in your estimation, what kind of costs would be involved in that?
Mr. Walsh.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, tunnels I wouldn't have a clue on other than millions and millions and millions of dollars. With respect to an overpass, we're probably looking at $15 or $20 million.
Thank you. And what that's good. Yeah, that's pretty expensive. I won't go down that line again. My other question was just in regards to the land there and talking about the reconfiguration of the actual road. Will the consultant, do you know, would expropriation be involved? Are we going to have consultation with the landowners in that area to make sure that we're not just arbitrarily expropriating somebody's land?
Mr. Walsh.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the whole purpose of an environmental assessment or a Class EA is to identify, in part, what lands are required. If we do require land, our preference is to negotiate. Expropriation is a final, desperate act on, in my opinion, on the part of the municipality.
Councillor Nutt.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
Any other questions with respect to any other reports? We're still on the consent agenda. Do you have some other questions? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. The Land Committee minutes, I guess it would be the minutes themselves. Item 5, the sale of lands by public tender. There's, I don't know, it doesn't say where these lands are, but I'm sure they're scattered all over Fort Erie, and it's just general. But anyway, they talk about some lands. It was noted that the properties are unbuildable, and we just had this problem a couple months ago with some people that were told, the neighbors were told that these properties were unbuildable, and then all of a sudden there's some building going to happen on that property. And so I'd like to get a little bit better clarification on where this unbuildable is. And then it goes on to say that the wetlands, there's wetlands. And I'm just curious as to why would the town of Fort Erie be selling wetlands when, if they're designated as wetlands, we should keep them as the town. And I know there's a lot of people that don't agree with wetlands, but wetlands are very important to a municipality, as they're the sponge. That's what collects all the water in our town. And if we constantly get rid of our wetlands, then that water has nowhere to go except people's basements and their backyards and their driveways. So anyway, I'd like to get some clarification here as, well, number one, why are we selling wetlands? And where are all these unbuildable properties? And are they going to stay unbuildable?
Mr. Cookett, who would you like to respond to that? Mr. Jansen? Mr. Jansen, and there was, interestingly enough, there was information relative to where these parcels of land were located. Many of them are to the east of Helena Street, over towards the old abandoned rail line. Mr. Jansen, can you comment further?
Through you to Councillor Luberts. These properties are currently being advertised for sale. I certainly can forward on the advertisement that relates to them in terms of the actual addresses. And I would have to look into, in terms of what more specifically which properties relate to wetlands. I think that was, may have been more of a general comment in this regard, but I can get in touch with you regarding that.
That's satisfactory, Councillor Luberts?
Yes, and thank you very much. And I think maybe our Environmental Advisory Committee should have some kind of heads up on what we're proposing here, especially if we're going to be selling wetlands, and let them comment on how they feel about environmental properties.
Well, the sale of the lands doesn't change the designation. It's still wetland, and my recollection of the discussion during the meeting was that there's probably going to be limited market for these properties.
Yes, but I know through experience that what happens is the developers come in, buy low because we determined that the property is useless and worthless because it's wetland, and then they get redesignation, and then they're allowed to build in it. That's just my experience over the last 8 years.
So Mr. Jansen is going to be getting back to you with some further information. That's satisfactory?
Yeah, and if I may,
Yep.
the very next item, the Coal Dogs property. And I see that we're working with the Peace Bridge Authority and the Niagara Parks Commission on that property. And
Right.
just a quick question is, why is the town not asking the Niagara Parks Commission to put in an emergency boat ramp along here? I know I brought this request up several times, even when the Niagara Parks Commission was here. And I asked if they would look into it and look at the feasibility and the possibility. And I'm not saying a boat ramp for everybody, just for our emergency vehicles, our fire and maybe the Coast Guard or even Canada Customs, because it's right by their Canada Customs dock. And I don't see that it was even requested by the town.
Mr. Walsh?
My apologies, Mr. Mayor. I don't recall that discussion at all. But as for the intent here is to to build this as a recreation park and not as an emergency access. I would suspect if our emergency services or customs, whomever, needed or saw fit that this should be an emergency access, they would come forward to the owners of the property.
Fire Chief, do you have any comments with respect to that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Walsh is correct in that if we required to get access, we would take access, and we have the ability to do that in legislation.
Councillor Lubert's back to you.
Yes, I understand that, and I understand that, you know, that the intent is to have some kind of park down there, but, you know, it wouldn't interfere with having a park down there. But in case of emergency, and I've been watching along that river, and there's not the best conditions for boat ramping. And if you get in a busy day along the river, there's a few places, but limited access, right? If there's people already there and they're bound up and things get in the way, you know, we don't have time for emergency vehicles to be waiting. And I thought that this would be a perfect place. They already have a dock there for customs, and it's something that we could look into anyway and see if all parties are interested. But I don't even think that it was even brought up to them.
So Councillor Luberts, the design of the park that's going to be built there hasn't been started. This is something that Mr. Walsh can bring forward. The town will be a commenting agency with respect to whatever the design work will look like. And Mr. Cookett, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, you stole my thunder there. It does state in there that this will be designed by the Peace Bridge, and we will be a commenting agency on that. So Mr. Walsh will be part of those discussions and decisions, and he can bring that to their attention and see if there is a possibility for emergency access there as well. So I'll leave that with Mr. Walsh to bring up at the meetings.
Anything further, Councillor Luberts? Anything further on any other reports in the consent agenda, Councillor Luberts? Anyone else have any questions? I had some questions about a report PDS 69, which is the Nye Road subdivision, and in particular, the proposal for the developer to start with the lots that will be constructed south of Nye Road, which means the Nye Road access will be the initial point of entry and exit from that subdivision, to and from that subdivision. What guarantees, if any, do we have, Ms. Dolch, that the balance of this subdivision will be completed, which would require then the upgrade to Royal York Road, which would be the southerly point of access and egress?
We don't have any assurances. When we phase, it's just the first phase. They haven't suggested to go forward for the second phase at this time, so they're just requesting the first phase be approved at this point. Should that be a concern, council does have the option to require the entire subdivision to go ahead without phasing, or alternatively can defer it, but I would prefer, if you did do that, that it be allowed to come back next week under special council and committee, only because of timing purposes.
What are the, so if it's going to be phased, what are the requirements then in terms of this road that comes in south of Nye Road with respect to a cul-de-sac or something of that nature? It doesn't appear to be anything on the plans.
There will be a requirement for a turnaround when it's phased, because we do need to be able to have garbage pickup, fire services, things like that, get in and out and be able to turn around. But it would be a temporary situation, and once it continued, that would close.
And if I might ask the chief, do you have any comments with respect to the one point of access to this subdivision?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. When I look at this, there are a couple issues that I have that are strictly fire-related and nothing else. One, it's outside the urban boundary, so we would have to shuttle water to these houses. The hydrants are further away than 1,500 feet. They're good hydrants, but there's no plan that I see in this. They're going to use cisterns for the homes, so that would influence me on whether or not I would like that or not. The second thing is that like you, I saw nothing on the plan that showed anywhere for turnaround for this, and that would have to be addressed for sure.
Would you have any concerns about the actual one point of entry? It looks like it's wide enough that it could be divided. Is that a preferable arrangement for you?
Yeah, as long as we can get in and turn around, that's our biggest issue. We have lots of places in town where we can't get turned around, and that causes us large issues, especially with, generally speaking, if I look at these homes, they're going to be larger homes, which we want like our aerial, one of our aerials in there, and if we can't get it turned around, that would be a big issue.
So, Ms. Dolch, I'm wondering if it wouldn't be appropriate to put this over till next week to get some of those issues ironed out, if it is going to be a phased development?
Sure, we can do that. It doesn't change the temporary cul-de-sac. That will be required automatically because we can't have a dead end longer than 90 meters. So we do need to require them to do a turnaround. If it's to defer it to consider the 2 phases, so the entire site to go ahead, then I would suggest definitely be deferred so that we can talk to the owner, get a schedule together for the full cost of the subdivision for the agreements.
And also to make sure that the fire chief's concerns are addressed.
Okay.
But anyways, right now it's in here. Is anyone wishing to, Councillor Passero?
Thank you, Worship. I would move to defer that if the clerk is agreeable to having a special council and committee meeting next week to get it on the agenda.
We can include the report next week.
Okay, so the motion to defer for 1 week. It's not debatable. All those in favor? That is carried. Any other questions or comments with respect to the consent agenda? If none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the recommendations? None opposed? That is carried. That then takes us to Planning and Development Services. Councillor Passero.
Planning and Development Services is now in session. No presentations or delegations, no reports, comments or questions under new business or inquiries. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if your department is the appropriate department to handle this question, but the downtown core of Ridgeway, and I'm sure in Bridgeburg as well, are experiencing quite a drop in their shops in terms of customers coming in and purchasing. So it's a 60% drop that they've just occurred since the summer has wrapped up. I'm wondering if there is something, I know that we pitched in with the region and we did a shop local campaign, which was not very successful. I'm just wondering if there is something that we could look at to put some skin in the game to assist these retailers and restaurants over the core of the winter months.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. I'm wondering if that is best deferred to corporate services or even the customer service working group that Councillor Zanko and I form a part of as far as communication and outreach to the community. But let me talk that over with Councillor Zanko and we'll figure something out. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, anything arising from the business status report? Seeing none, I will turn the chair back to His Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Passero. That takes us to Infrastructure Services. Councillor Zanko.
Thank you, Your Worship. We don't have any presentations or delegations this evening. We also don't have any reports. So does any member of council have any questions or inquiries? Councillor Nutt?
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Walsh. Mr. Walsh, as the winter approaches, I had a couple constituents asking about ditching on the east side of Ott Road near Church and down that. The ditching has moved northward and they were just looking for an update on the schedule.
Mr. Walsh? Oh, sorry.
You can email me if you don't have it off the top of your head. I'll communicate back.
Thank you.
To the
That's what I'll do.
residents.
I'll
Yep.
look into that. So
That's
that was
Audette Church?
Yeah, Church Road and Ott Road, the east ditch. They said the ditching has been done on the west side, and they were wondering when the east side is going to be done. They were kind of hoping before winter, but I said I would check with you and get back to them.
I'll do that.
Anything further, Councillor Nutt? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Walsh. I was canvassing over the weekend, and I came across a couple of residents who on Shirley Road were experiencing some flooding and drainage issues, largely due to the pipes that have been plugged up near the water pump station, and you and I have talked about that. I'm wondering if there's anything that we can do, or if you can explain the situation.
Through you, Madam Chair, the culverts under Shirley Road, we can take a look at them, make sure they are running as they should. The issues in that area, as I understand, are on private property and through regulated water courses. So in order to do any ditching in there, he wouldn't be doing it. I think it would be the Conservation Authority. They would have jurisdiction over it. But all of the water courses in that area are on private property, so you'd also need the homeowner's permission.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, is there any way that we can find out who the owners are and perhaps talk to them? And also, I know that the residents have spoken with the Conservation Authority and they have kind of flung it back in our ballpark. I'm not sure if there's an opportunity to have a discussion with them as well to see how best we can handle this situation.
We can look into it further. I'll see if our drainage superintendent can look into it.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, Madam Chair, I just have a couple of more questions. I just wonder, through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Walsh, if it's possible to take another look at Poplar Road that hasn't been done and the west side of Bethune. If we could look at having those roads chip and tarred next year.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not going to promise what we will be doing next year. We have plans through our business status report to bring our new road resurfacing and reconstruction program forward for the November Council and Committee. Our committee and council report. We're still waiting on the draft report from the consultant. That will lay out the best plan in terms of the financial resources of the town going forward. I haven't seen the draft yet, as I noted, so I'm not sure which roads are earmarked right now. But I do know that we've done a significant amount of resurfacing in Thunder Bay, and I would assume that those roads, I know they're in bad shape. I think our plan would be to get in there and finish the area and get out.
Okay. Awesome to hear that. Thank you. And just two more questions. Mm-hmm. The Bernard Road and Burley Road, as I was canvassing out in those areas, they're experiencing an extremely high amount of traffic and fast traffic. And I'm just wondering if perhaps the traffic committee could take a look at those roads and see if there's a possibility of putting in some speed grids or something to that effect, or look at, more signage. But if you could take a look at that, that would be great.
Sure, Mr. Walsh, can you add that to the traffic committee?
Yeah, if you don't mind, may I make a comment on that? We will bring it up to the police, and what they typically do is put out a cruiser out there and hand out tickets if necessary, and they also do a little bit of a speed survey. I'm not saying they're not speeding, but sometimes speeding is in the eye of the beholder, and they'll bring a report back to traffic coordinating committee on whether it's worthwhile looking into it further as well.
Awesome. And then my last question, Madam Chair, is with respect to the status of way signs. Do we know where that is at this point?
Wayfinding signage? Yes, we're still in study on that. I do have a draft icon for the Ridgeway BIA, came in late last week. I was away Friday. I will deliver that via email to the Ridgeway BIA for comment, and the consultant should be working away on the remainder of the study. So in terms of the big picture, they should be done by the end of the year, and that'll be a report to the next council early in 2019.
Anything further? Does any other member of council have any questions, Your Worship?
I just wanted to follow up with respect to Councillor Butler's third item, and that had to do with the speeding. I'm hearing about speeding everywhere, and whether it's Stevensville Road, Gorham Road, Burley, Bernard, Concession, you name it, there's speeding. Also, there's been a lot of concern expressed about the points where the recreation trail crosses the roads. Some of the roads are quite small, the traffic is fairly limited, but some of them are quite busy. So I'm wondering whether it wouldn't be appropriate for the infrastructure services to take a look at some type of overall strategy that will deal with speeding in general, and how we deal with the interface of the recreation trail and the roads to prevent potential damage. So, Mr. Walsh, I don't know whether that's on the radar, but things like the rumble cuts, some signage, those probably would be very helpful. Are on that.
Mr. Walsh, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, please, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, with respect to overall speeding in the town, I think that's it's a little above our technical knowledge within staff in-house. We'll require a consultant on that, so we can look at budget items for that upcoming. With respect to pedestrian crossings at the major trail interfaces, we've just finished pedestrian counts at where the Friendship Trail meets Gorham and Ridge Road. That's north, Ridge Road North. With respect to looking into more active pedestrian traffic measures at those two crossings.
Thank you.
Councillor Passero?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to supplement that, the active transportation master study that council agreed to fund in the previous budget will also look at those trail crossings. So that's a specific item that will be included when that comes back. When the trail was first designed many, many years ago, it was designed to be traffic centric, and that's how it is now. They have the right of way and everything's geared to keep the cars moving. Social mindset has now shifted towards active transportation, so our active transportation committee is very much looking forward to being involved in that, with the mindset that when you approach that trail, it should be pedestrians first, just because of the way that society is moving towards. So that specific item will be encapsulated when that information comes back.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any additional questions? Councillor Nutt?
Sorry, Madam Chair. Not really, well, I guess a question for Mr. Walsh, but to the mayor's point about policing in the community and hearing that, there was an interesting, some interesting information that came out today from the head of the police services union that talked about how the region has only hired 8 police constables, and they're seriously undermanned and staffed, and I think that it might even behoove Fort Erie to look at alternatives in policing. And I'm going to give you the perfect example. As I called Mr. Cookett, I was out front of Tim Hortons in Stevensville. We have a serious problem. There are no stopping signs, and our bylaw enforcement has been active in ticketing people. Well, there were 2 large dump trucks, and when they park like that, in the past there has been accidents, and not too long ago there was a serious accident where somebody was T-boned. I actually was surprised to see that a local OPP officer got us coffee, and on the way out saw the 2 dump trucks where the 2 gentlemen were sitting actually on the curb outside eating their breakfast, and he went over and he ticketed both vehicles. So, I mean, I look at that service versus the service we're getting from the Niagara Regionals, and I have to question, you know, who would do a more thorough job. And I was actually really happy to see, I passed along the information to Mr. Cookett. The local businesses in there have voiced how effective our bylaw is at policing that area in those situations, and that to see another police officer from the OPP take it upon himself to notice that there was a violation that occurred and to write tickets was refreshing to see. But I just want to pass along that information as food for thought, and maybe that's something that needs to be considered from a regional perspective. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions or inquiries? Seeing none, does any member of council have any questions regarding the business status report? Seeing none, I will pass the chair back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Zanko. That takes us to Corporate and Community Services. Councillor Nutt.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our Corporate and Community Services is now open. Tonight we have a presentation and delegation from Nick DiCarlo. Could he please come to the podium? Can you please activate the mic for the podium, Your Worship? Thank you. Good evening, Mr. DiCarlo. Can you please provide your full name and address?
Yes, my name is Nick DiCarlo. I live at 476 Lakeside Road in Fort Erie.
Thank you very much. You may begin your presentation.
Okay, basically I came to the city hall here to get the permits. I wanted to do everything legitimately. And the lady upstairs said that I didn't need a permit. Go ahead and do the construction that I was planning on to do. So so I did the planning, and then I have a problem with somebody down the street, and every time I call the cops on him, he reports me to the city. And the inspector, John, comes over and, you know, tells me I got to move the fence, cut the lights down. I cut the lights down. He said, I'll see what I can do for you. He said, probably I just let this thing go through with the impeachment of the land. The guy again, and now I'm in Florida. I figured everything was fine because he said he was going to look after it. I didn't hear nothing from him. I get a letter here and United States in my other place stating that the fence was going to be taken down within 30 days. So I called John. I said, look, I'm in Florida till spring. I'm going to come back and I'll take care of it. He says, no, you got to do it now. So I came back. I flew specially back 5 days later. I came to City Hall. It was his day off or he was on holidays or whatever. So the lady upstairs, the nice lady, said, I'm going to get the gentleman above him, his supervisor, talk to you. I suggested everything to him. I told him what was going on with this gentleman down the road. And he said, let me look after it. Relax, go home, and I'll call you tomorrow if there's a problem. The next day he called. He said, go back to Florida. Everything's fine. I've taken care of everything. So I go back to Florida. Now, meanwhile, this guy again, this predator down the road, calls, hey, I want the fence moved again. So I had to come back again early to straighten this thing out with John. Now he says, come in, and here I am now again. The same thing over and over. It said it was, you know, the other gentleman said it was fine. It was taken care of. There's nothing to worry about. Go back to Florida. I get there, and the problem starts again. I'm just getting tired of this. I'm going to move probably because I can't stay in this area. This guy is a predator. He wants to fight me. I mean, he knows I was a pro wrestler, so he's after me for some ego thing. I don't know what his problem is. And the people in the whole neighborhood are scared of him. They don't go out in their backyards because he built this giant deck, his lookout point, and everybody's tired of this guy. Nobody does anything. The city can't do nothing. The police can't do nothing. The police tell me he's dangerous. Stay away from him. What am I supposed to do? He comes and stands behind me when I'm working around my house and stares at me all day long. Patrols 10, 15, 20 times a day, staring at my house, giving me the fingers. I'm tired of this, and I'm really getting upset with it all. Okay, now it's every time that I report him to the police, I get hassled by the city about this fence again, you know. And everybody, the two people I talked to here, they said it was taken care of, there was no problem. As soon as it's reported, oh, well, we've had another complaint. It's the same person. I've got the letters, I don't know if you got them, from all my neighbors. They love the property. People take pictures of it. They say, I've done a big improvement. The only guy that's complaining is a guy down the street that has nothing to do with my area. And I'm just tired of it. And I just want to see something done about his deck taken down because that other people there can relax and go in their backyards. They have to put blinds because he looks into their backyards. He's intimidating everybody constantly with his reactions and what he does. And I'm just tired of it. And I just want to see something come to an end. one way or another. If I have to take the fence down, I will take the fence. He wins. I don't really care at this point. I'll come back, but I want till spring when I come back from my holidays. I'm not ruining my holidays now because I don't want to leave my place wide open like I'm going to have to if they cut the fence. And I can't get the contractor right now. He's busy because he's doing a lot of construction. So I'm kind of stuck too. And I'm working on other projects in Europe and Florida. I don't need his hassle here. I'm getting more hassle in Fort Erie than I've had it anywhere in my projects in the world. And I'm really tired of it. I mean, that's all I have to say. Okay. I'm hopefully that, you people understand that, I'm trying to make the place nice. Everybody likes it. That I have not had a complaint except one person, and he's jealous and he's a creep. I'm sorry. That's all I have to say.
Mr. DiCarlo,
Yes.
if you could just please remain there because
right,
I want
certainly.
to give council an opportunity to
Okay.
ask you questions.
No problem, certainly.
Your worship.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. DiCarlo, for coming out. And I noticed, looking at the photographs that we have here, that there was a picket fence in approximately the same spot where the
It was exactly the same spot.
And
it wasn't all picket fence. Some of it was regular fence, some was shrubs with broken fence, with thorns. I cleaned it all up. I wanted to clean everything up nicely.
And how long have you lived at the property?
4 years.
Do you know how long the picket fence existed prior to your...
55 years since the house was built.
Okay, that's your understanding?
Yes, that's what I was told on the prints, and the owner, I talked to him a while back, and he said he's always had a picket fence, then he had a regular fence, it broke, and he just back and forth. He was like an old hermit or whatever.
If I might, Mr. Chair, so is this fence that you've constructed partially for security purposes?
That's all, security person. I don't want to be bothered by anybody. I mean, I've been hassled in the past by people because of my business, and I just don't need it anymore. That's why I built that fence, to be private. This is my retirement. I don't want to be bothered by anybody.
If you were to sell this property, would you be agreeable to, at that point in time, the fence being moved?
Well, yes, I would have to move it. Yeah, obviously, if that's the decision. But I see people, I drove through there and I've counted over 200 houses with the same thing, impeachment with whatever, walls and fences. And when I told the inspector, I said, what about all these places? I have the photographs and their address. I'm not worried about them. I'm only interested in you, he said. And that kind of bothered me because he wasn't interested in anybody else. He was interested in me. That was a direct hit to me.
You may.
Notice that there's a ditch between your property and the road.
My property?
Ditch between where your fence is and the road.
Right.
And is the road that you face, Lakehurst, very much traveled?
No.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, sir. I'm sympathetic to your concerns. Don't go away.
Don't go away yet, Mr. DiCarlo. Councillor Passero had a few questions here. Can you turn his mic back on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question
Okay.
for Mr. DiCarlo. The alternative available to us tonight is to permit the fence and have you enter into an encroachment agreement. Are you in any way opposed to entering into?
No, I said it right at the beginning. If there was taxes to pay or whatever, I would do it. Okay. Yeah, there was no problem there at all. From the beginning, I told him that.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from council? Thank you very much, Mr. DiCarlo.
We're done. All right, thank you.
Moving on to item 10.2, can I have a mover for CS 15-2018? So moved by Councillor Butler. That report is on the floor for comments or questions. Your worship.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor, Mr. Chair. I suppose we should ask the acting clerk if the appropriate way to proceed with this would be to defeat the motion and then move another motion if we're inclined to consider approving the request to permit the existing fence. Is that correct?
Madam Clerk?
Yes, Your Worship, that's what you would do.
Okay, I'm inclined to support Mr. DiCarlo's request for the reasons that he provided. This is different from some of the other requests that we've had. This property is clearly separated from the road by the ditch. It's a very seldom traveled side road, and having regard to the apparent support of the neighbors, with the exception of one, it seems to me that it's not unreasonable, particularly if Mr. DiCarlo is prepared to agree as part of the encroachment agreement that when he sells the property, the fence will be moved back. So I'm not going to support the recommendations. I'm going to request that we approve the encroachment.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Butler, then I'll go to Councillor Luberts. Or, sorry, Councillor Zanko, I apologize.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, through you to Ms. Dolch, and I'm not actually sure if you'll know the answer, if perhaps Mr. Cook would have. Just like he said this evening, that he was really trying to follow the guidelines that we provide. But it was interesting that he had come to the town to seek approval, that there was an existing fence there, and he was told that, you know, nothing further would be needed. And that's when he built this fence. Do you have any background on that? Because I feel as though we gave him the green light, and then now we're trying to retract that, which is a big project.
Unfortunately, I don't. I can look into the matter. I think Mr. Cookett actually has some more background.
Mr. Cookett?
Yes, you chair to the councillor. That is correct. The gentleman did come to the counter. He did want to do everything correct. The question that was asked to staff was, can I replace my existing fence? I believe the staff, not knowing that the existing fence was on town property, said, yes, you can move ahead. So I think you're right. We did give him a green light, and we probably should have looked into it a little deeper. So the gentleman is correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Luberts, and then I'll go to Councillor Passero.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm assuming I'm going to have to direct my question to Mr. Walsh. And I'm just looking at page 3 of the report under general guidelines. And so it has some guidelines that we look at. And Mr. Walsh, does the encroachment pose a safety hazard?
Mr. Walsh?
Through you, Mr. Chair, Infrastructure Services looked at this encroachment from both an operational point of view and future capital works, and we were confident that in the 10 to 15, 20-year range, there'd be no capital works in the area that would affect the encroachment. And we feel the fence as it stands and as it stood did not interfere with our operations.
Yes, but I guess then that would say that it doesn't appear, I mean, I'm looking at the pictures here, it doesn't appear that it would pose a safety hazard. And I don't see that it is constructed on a permanent foundation. I would think that would be more like a house or a shed or something. So that's out. And does it compromise our drainage? And I see that wouldn't happen because we got the ditch there and the fence is not in the ditch. Is it minor in nature? Well, that there to me would be the falling point. At 14 feet or so on a road allowance, it's not minor, but in this case, being between the road, or the ditch being between the fence and the road, I would say, you know, I could go with the minor, right? And then the next one is the encroached upon road allowance required for municipal purposes. Mr. Welch, you've just answered that question. So I'm looking at our general guidelines, and I guess I could support Mr. DiCarlo and say we can leave the fence there, but I can't allow the fence to be there without an encroachment agreement, because we've done this throughout the town and other places, and each resident had to file and sign and agree to an encroachment agreement. So if Mr. DiCarlo is okay with an encroachment agreement, then that's the way I would like to go. And if that means we defeat this and bring forward another recommendation, I would support another recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Luberts. Councillor Passero?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, I'll be supporting the defeat of this so we can discuss it further. I'm glad that it's brought to light some improvements to an internal process that we may have to look at, so we don't put other residents in the same situation where we give them the green light and then go after them. I don't know if other members of council have seen an encroachment agreement, but one of the items in there is that the item that encroaches upon town property, it says in there explicitly that should town works or regional works have to occur, that it has to be removed at either the owner's expense or we'll do it for them. So all of the power as far as an encroachment agreement lies with the municipality, not with the homeowner. That's the chance that they take, and there is a sizable fee associated with that. But I think that's the way to go in this situation. The reason why we have these encroachment agreements and this policy is more to do with public access, and it stems from waterfront specifically, but it's carried across through the town. I don't see any reason, given what people have already brought to the table, to say that this in any way encumbers public access along those right-of-ways. So I'll be supporting the defeat of this so we can move it along.
Thank you, Councillor Passero. Any other councillors wish to speak? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the recommendation? All those opposed? That motion's defeated. Your worship, did you want to propose one of the alternatives?
Yes, I'd like to move that council approves the request to permit the existing fence to continue to encroach on the Lakehurst Avenue road allowance pertinent to the building located at 476 Lakeside Drive, and the entry into an encroachment agreement, including a provision that the fence will be moved when the owner sells the property. Secondly, that council waives the need for a reference plan.
That recommendation is on the floor for a comment or question. Councillor Zanko and then Councillor Passero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question, and again, I'm going to direct this to Ms. Dolch. Mr. DiCarlo had mentioned that he had letters from all of the, well, from most of the area neighbors. I didn't see this in the report. Was this circulated at another time?
I'll take it.
Mr. Cookett?
We did, following the agenda going out, we did receive letters of support for the fence from a few of the neighbors of this gentleman. We didn't circulate those. I don't believe, oh, they were circulated. So you do have a copy of those, but it wasn't part of the agenda and attached to the report.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a procedural question for the clerk, just based on Councillor Zanko's question. And I think that, would it be proper to post those letters with the minutes when this is voted on, if it passes? I think for transparency reasons, we have the letters, and I think that it would be appropriate to post them with the minutes based on the outcome of the vote on this motion. Would you agree?
I believe that the letters are public documents and could be circulated.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Passero, and then I'll come to Councillor Luberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering if I could do a friendly amendment to His Worship's motion just to add the words "or removed" instead of just "moved." The homeowner may not necessarily want to go through the expense of moving it and rebuilding. He may just want to remove it and leave that expense to the next homeowner. They may want a different fence, or
sure,
so we could just add "moved" or "removed." Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Amenable to that. Councillor Luberts?
Yes, and just as along the same lines as the fence having to be moved or removed, I'm just wondering if the mayor can maybe explain why it is that we would have that in the motion. It's on title, and wouldn't the encroachment agreement be carried over on title? And wouldn't the new owner maybe have to go into an encroachment agreement? Because, you know, if it's not posing any problems, and it addresses all the guidelines, and so if he sells the house and the new owner decides that he wants to keep it, then, oh, excuse me.
Can I have Mr. Lustig answer that question for you, Councillor Lubert?
Did you just call me?
No. No, that was a good friend of mine. No, but I understand where you're coming from, Mayor Redicott, but, you know, if it carries over on title, you know, if the new owner has to sign an agreement, then the new owner can sign the agreement. Because a lot of people buy a house and they like it for whatever reason. And then it's like, well, you can buy it, but you have to tear that fence down and you know, I don't know. It doesn't matter to me, but I think it would be a lot cleaner for Mr. DiCarlo if you were allowed to leave the fence there, and then when the time comes that we're gonna do road work, we'll request that the fence be moved.
Okay, Ms.
I'll just tell you what my thinking is.
Okay.
So my thinking
Your
on
Worship.
this is that this is not really a minor encroachment. This is a significant encroachment. We've provided lots of reasons why we think that it should be given consideration for an encroachment agreement. I specifically asked Mr. DiCarlo the question because I don't want him to move. I'd like him to keep his fence, but when he does move, I think we should try to deal with the size of this encroachment. This is a significant encroachment regardless. So it's possible that a new owner could come before council and request an extension of that encroachment agreement. It's very possible that the council of the day might be agreeable to that. But I think we should try to address it at some point, and that's as good a point as any, in my view. That's why I included it.
Thank you, Your Worship. Does that answer your question,
Okay,
Councilor Lewis?
yeah, I can accept that as long as Mr. DiCarlo understands that if he were to sell it, he can explain that to any potential buyer, that they could come to the town and request the encroachment to stay, and then he would file another encroachment agreement, and I think Mr. DiCarlo would be happy with that. Thank you.
Stay there anyway. Because of that guy, I'm not gonna stay there. I'm gonna sell in the spring when I get back. I'm gonna sell. So it'd be nice if I could leave the fence for the next person, because I'm leaving. Yeah, I'm moving. I wanna live here, not here. Maybe move back to Ridgeway or something.
Okay. I apologize, Mr. DiCarlo, but when we're in committee meeting, the gallery is not actually allowed to have any input. And I should have,
Well, given
just
the
didn't
light
want
of
to
that
interrupt you.
information, you know, if he's gonna tear it down, then if he's gonna move, I don't know why he would bother signing an encroachment agreement with the town and spend $3,000 and then move.
Well,
That's something that Mr. DiCarlo can look at, but if it's gonna come down when he sells it, there's no point in doing all of this and spending $3,000. And I hope he understands that, and but I would support Mayor Redekop's motion now, but I'm sure that Mr. DiCarlo understands. It's, there's
Thank you,
no
Mr.
sense moving forward.
Thank you, Councilor Luberts. I'd just like to ask, just along that vein, to ask the town solicitor, who has some knowledge of the encroachment agreement. Once it goes on title, it is transferable. Is that correct, Mr. Ludzik?
Yes, I believe that the resolution that is being proposed, though, dispenses with the requirement of the reference plan. So what is going to be registered on title isn't the agreement itself, but as the report points out, it would be a notice of the agreement. So it's a little bit different. But were it not for what Mayor Redekop is proposing, what is before the council, we would have an encroachment agreement with Mr. DiCarlo that would continue, and if he sold it, and despite the fact the notice only is registered, but given the request or the proposal that the agreement has a provision in it that it be removed, that would limit the life of the encroachment agreement, and the next owner would have to come forward and make a request, and the council could consider it at that point.
Okay, thank you. And that is your intention. Okay, thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to go to Councilor Passero, then I'll come back to you, Councilor Luberts.
So I still fully support the original intent of His Worship's motion to have it moved or removed. That the long-term goal of the municipality is to not have any encroachments. So this is something that we do on a short-term basis to recognize certain circumstances. The encroachment agreement itself also speaks to the fact that a homeowner cannot modify, maintain, or enhance the item that's encroaching, which means you can't beef it up, you can't support it. At a certain point in time when that fence becomes no longer stable, it has to be removed, and we want to reclaim that land for the public. So an encroachment agreement is not in perpetuity. It's not giving authorization for somebody or following homeowners to always have that. It's recognizing an existing situation given certain circumstances, but also recognizing that at a certain point, we need to bring things back above board. So I support the motion as it stands. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Luberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And just given what Mr. Lustig had told us, then as long as Mr. DiCarlo, that's just something that he's going to have to decide because he's indicated he's going to be moving anyway. If he sells his house in a month, no sense him going through an encroachment agreement, spending $3,000 on what? He might as well just take the fence down now, if that's what his intent is. But as long as he understands that, because he needs to know what his options are. But what Councilor Pacero was saying about encroachments and that they're just short term, I have to ask Mr. Ludsdick, is that true? Because you just said that it's transferable and it can go along with title and through ownership. And as long as what Mr. Walsh is saying, as long as we're not planning any roadworks, that encroachment can stay there for a period of time.
Right.
Is that not correct?
That's correct. 2 points. First of all, I think with respect to the comment you made about $3,000, you have to keep in mind the fact that $2,200 of the estimated $3,000 is for a reference plan, which you're suggesting is going to be waived, so it wouldn't be $3,000 in Mr. DiCarlo's case, based upon the proposal that's before the council. But secondly, you're right. The agreement continues as, until we have the authority to, on 30 days' notice, if we require it, to bring an end to the encroachment agreement in the normal course of events. Right.
Anything else, Councilor? Nope. Okay. So if His Worship could read the proposed.
Yep. Okay, so I move that council approves the request to permit the existing fence to continue to encroach on the Lakehurst Road allowance pertinent to the building located at 476 Lakeside Drive, and the entry into an encroachment agreement, including a provision that the fence will be moved or removed once the owner sells the property. Secondly, that council waives the need for a reference plan.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? None opposed. That carries. Moving on to item 10.3, new business and inquiries. Are there any members of council who have new business or inquiries? Seeing none, I'll move on to 10.4, the business status report. Are there any comments or questions regarding the business status report? Seeing none, I'll close corporate and community services and turn the chair back to His Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Nutt. Are there any meetings that anyone needs to be alerted to? Councillor Pacero?
My apologies, Your Worship, if this wasn't already announced before I arrived, but our Health Services Committee meeting tomorrow at 4:30 p.m. here at Town Hall.
Correct. Any other meetings? Councillor Butler?
The Ridgeway BIA is meeting this Wednesday at 5:15 at St. Luke's Church.
Any other meetings? Councillor Nutt?
Not a meeting, Your Worship, but I'd just like to say a special thank you to the Stevensville Kinsmen and Canettes for hosting their first community dinner again last night. They do it annually, and it was last night, and I'd just like to thank that organization for their continued efforts and hard work in the community.
And the pie was excellent, as was the whole meal, really. Okay, any other meetings? If not, Councillor Nutt, would you be good enough to help us adjourn the meeting?
I would love to. The corporate and community, the council and committee meeting for the town of Fort Erie hereby adjourns at 7:18 p.m.
All those in favor? None opposed? That is carried.